Hola a todos, buenos días. A nombre de la Cámara de Comercio Italiana en México, les doy la bienvenida a este webinar llevado a cabo con Poli.design. Esta actividad forma parte de la serie de iniciativas que nosotros tenemos para promover la oferta académica italiana en México y que justamente los alumnos mexicanos puedan conocer por excelencia cuáles son las universidades italianas que se dedican o que son líderes en materia de diseño, moda, interiorismo, y por ende Poli.design es una de estas universidades. El día de hoy el webinar se llevará a cabo en inglés. Al final daremos unos minutos para preguntas y respuestas, así que si gustan dejar sus preguntas en el chat, con mucho gusto nosotros las vamos a leer para Lorenzo, que es nuestro ponente de hoy. Pueden dejarlas ya sea en español o en inglés. Bueno, ahora sin más por el momento doy la palabra a Sofía de Poli.design, quien presentará en inglés un poco más de la universidad.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you everyone for being here with us today. So I'm Sofia D'Alessandro from the International Affairs Office of Poli.design, which is a society founded by the Politecnico di Milano. We provide specializing masters and executive courses in several disciplines of design. We are based in Milan, but we have been collaborating with universities and we have partnerships with organizations and companies all over the world. So the Politecnico di Milano is over 106 years old school, and it's been training professionals, architects, designers, and engineers for centuries now. So about this presentation, it's about to start. We have the pleasure to be here with Professor Lorenzo Morganti, who is the co-director of our Master in Premium Design Management. And today he will share with you some interesting case studies and some insights of the contents that are covered more in depth during the course. So, of course, at the end, as Claudia said, you are free to ask us any question, even if you have any question related to the selection process or to any other information about the university. We are more than happy to answer to you. I'm not sure whether Professor Morganti is available to start. Well, in the meantime, I can tell you that you can always visit our website. We have more than 25 specializing masters in several disciplines, from interior to fashion to retail design or even design for food. And we also had 2 previous presentations with the Italian Chamber of Commerce in Mexico, which I would like to thank, by the way, for giving us the chance to participate into this Encuentro Creativo, and giving us the occasion to present our masters and also to meet Mexican students. We have a very strong international network, and we're always happy to connect with potential students from other countries, also to find out more about their expectations and their educational paths. And also we have other type of experiences. You can find everything in our website. Professor Morganti, are you available to start the presentation? I'm not sure whether you can listen to me. Just a second.
Ok, no sé si nos pueden dar unos minutos, por favor. Estamos teniendo unos problemas técnicos con el ponente. En unos minutos más daremos inicio con la ponencia. Gracias.
Hello everyone again. Scusatemi,
ero telefono col professor Biamonti, eccoci.
No worries. So as I was saying, Professor Lorenzo Morganti is our co-director of the Master in Premium Design Management. And so I will leave the floor to you, Professor Morganti, and we can start the presentation. Thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you. First of all, very nice to meet you. I'm glad to meet you all today. And let me now share my screen and start with today's topic, which is, of course, premium design management. And I am now sharing. Please tell me in case you had problems in seeing the screen. I think you are now seeing the screen. Yes, but let me know in case there was any problem. So premium design management, the first thing to consider is the definition. So what is premium design? What are we referring when we use this word, premium design? And this is already a thing that might be quite misleading and difficult to some extent. We generally, as far as we are regarded here at Poli.design, tend to associate this to the so-called affordable area of luxury. I know that there might be different definition of this, but we are, of course, doing this also according to the studies and the research led by Alta Gamma, which is, of course, the association that I am now introducing, which is quite important because Alta Gamma, as you can read here, is the most important association of companies in Italy, focusing specifically on the subject of luxury. If you were wondering what is this association, I think that probably the best way to define it would be through its associates, but I am also trying to provide you with a little bit of their objectives, what they're doing. And of course, as you can see here, they were born already in 1992, and their main objective since the beginning has always been, of course, to strengthen the international presence of the companies that founded it. The founding members were Michele Alessi from, of course, the Italian company Alessi, which I think probably many of you already know, Mario and Paolo Bandiera from Le Copain, then, of course, Marina Deserti, Baratti Milano, which is a small but very famous chocolate company in Italy, Ferruccio Ferragamo. This is, of course, a name that you probably already know in the field of fashion. Fontana Arte with Carlo Guglielmi. Fontana Arte is one of the, let's say, historical brand in lighting devices. So just to say that luxury, especially for Italy, entails a lot of product design within the field of interior decoration. And also, of course, Maurizio Gucci, which is a name, of course, that doesn't need any presentation, Gianfranco Ferré and Franco Mattioli, Angelo Zegna, and Santo Versace. So in brief, the area of product design, home decoration and furniture together with fashion, of course. And then throughout the years, also the companies of the best quality food products in Italy join, like, of course, our sparkling wine with Ca' del Bosco, with Ferrari, but other companies. And since the beginning, they always focused on specific markets like the Chinese, the US, but also Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico, of course, being important markets for the Italian products because of their, let's say, long-lasting tradition and cooperation that have always been fostered and researched. Therefore, these companies studied a lot and researched, tried to join forces, something that, for instance, the French can do because of their biggest corporation like LVMH and Kering, which are already in itself joining together different companies. The Italian area tried to do throughout this association, Alta Gamma. So to join forces and to put together all the research that they do. Of course, today the association is much larger than it used to be in 1992. And as I already mentioned, it spans from fashion, home decoration, food and beverage, hospitality, but also automotive and more. Just to provide you with a very quick overlook of who they are. Here you see, of course, Alfa Romeo, you see Ferrari, so you see, of course, also automotive, but you see a lot of fashion like Keaton, which is super top high-end menswear fashion. Then, of course, you have the food, you have the hospitality, you have the sparkling wine, and so on and so forth. But what is interesting and what is probably more important as far as we are regarded is what they are studying and researching, because they have planned every year a series of meetings that goes from the analysis of the market, the analysis of the consumers, up to the possible future development within the field of design. So what will be design in the future? This is due to one peculiar fact that specifically referring to luxury companies and luxury brand, they can never just wait and sit idly by. They always need to progress. They always need to go on and to stay updated on the latest trend and also on the future development in the field of society, in the field of products, in the field of consumers. So this is why I am quoting, of course, their data. And I quite agree with their basic assumption, that is that knowing the consumer is fundamental for all luxury companies. But behaviors, habits, aspirations are no longer foreseeable and predictable on the basis of traditional demographic and income variables. This is something that they knew already before the pandemic. And this is something that after the pandemic is even more relevant. Okay, so this is why it's very, very difficult to navigate throughout the very, very complex world of luxury. Of course, the Italian companies try to join forces, as I said, and rely on this segmentation study. One of the studies also introduced different customer segment, so to understand the habit and to be able and prepared to fulfill the necessities and the requirements that the consumers were asking in their brands. On average, this, let's say, up to last year, they were, of course, leading not just quantitative analysis, but also qualitative analysis. This means that they analyzed the direct service on more than 12,000 consumers with an average expenditure of 37,000 euros. This leads us back to what I started from, that is, how do we define premium design and how do we define luxury? One first way, of course, one possible first way to define luxury and to define the consumers is through, of course, the average expenditure. But of course, this is not enough, because the attitude of the consumer is quite crucial also to understand how to manage the product, how to manage the retail environment, and how to manage the customer journey. They identified, of course, 8 global segments, 2 country-specific, 2 by gender. All in all, they identified about 12 clusters of consumers. This is a study that they updated up to, let's say, 2020, so before, of course, the pandemic. Then they decided to slightly change, and I will also show you a quick overview on their, let's say, perspective on the consumers and how the consumers are today after the pandemic. But let's now get back to the True Luxury Global Consumer Insight, which had this very year, just a few days ago, an update. This is why I'm quoting here in this, of course, presentation, a few of the data that they just introduced to the public here in Milano. Of course, the study is delivered by the Boston Consulting Group that works for Alta Gamma, that is hired for these researches. Just to recap the data and the figures that I'm showing you, these were taken from direct surveys on more than 12,000 consumers. And the average spend, so the average spend of these consumers is about 37,000 euros. This was, let's say, up to 2022. Like the market research used to be, of course, 10 plus 1. 10 plus 1 was a small focus on the Indian market. But of course, the latest update, the update of as of 2023, is changing a little bit more, both in terms of the average spend and also in terms of the markets analyzed. This is how it looks like today. The average spend has now become about 39,000 euros. This means that luxury is actually increasing and the average spend is also increasing. And also you have probably seen that the flags here have changed, because the market that were directly analyzed. This means that those more than 12,000 consumers that were interviewed by the Boston Consulting Group specifically for Alta Gamma now belong to different countries. These different countries, of course, have a new country joining, which is Saudi Arabia. India is not just a focus any longer, but is a market which is thoroughly analyzed. And there is, as you probably see, a market missing now, that is Russia, of course, due to the fact that it is considered today almost impossible, of course, to go on dealing with the Russian market due to, of course, the sanctions and due to what is happening now in the overall, of course, let's say, geopolitical situation. This is also just as a quick remark, something which is quite crucial, because in these very days when they presented the new, let's say, outcomes of this new study, they underlined the fact that of course, geopolitical situation is becoming relevant, and it's influencing directly also the habit of the consumers and also the revenues of the companies. So to say that the Italian companies, but I would say the international companies dealing in the field of luxury, do have to be aware of what is happening, much more today than it used to be, of course, in the past. But what about the market? Of course, I just said that the geopolitical situation is quite relevant, but when I refer to the geopolitical situation, I'm not just referring to the war in Europe, but I'm also referring, of course, to phenomena like the pandemic, because forecasts could be misleading. Forecasts could be misleading because in 2016, they were, of course, considering that by 2022, the luxury consumers would be about 480 million around the world. And they delivered this survey. This has, of course, changed just over the very last years, so up to 1 year ago. And I will also, of course, show you how it is today. But let's first analyze the so-called luxury pyramid, which helps us define what is premium, what is not premium, what is pure luxury, and the different families of consumers, of course, according, in this case, to their average spend. So we have a first sector, which is so-called the top luxury of those consumers that every year spend at least more. This is not the average, but this is more for this specific cluster, more than 20,000 euros every year in luxury items. That is to say, all of those items they don't need for their everyday activities, work, or also travel and leisure. Then there is another segment, which is mainly dedicated to those people that can afford themselves to spend more than 10,000 euros, then of course 5,000 euros. And then we have a series of thresholds, which you see in the hues of the blues, the blues and light blues, 2,000 and less, which are what we generally call aspirational consumer. This is what we could, in brief, define as affordable luxury, that some, of course, call also premium market. This is, of course, a series of thresholds that have been decided by Alta Gamma, by the consultants that work for Alta Gamma. They could be slightly different, but they are important to define the specific habits of those clusters. How does this influence design? This can greatly influence design, maybe just focusing, for instance, on the final look of the store, because the store could be totally different if focusing on very small numbers of possible consumers, like it is in the case of the so-called beyond money cluster, or bigger masses of consumers, like in the case of the aspirational consumers. Because the main, of course, information that you can get from this data is that this pyramid relies a lot on premium and affordable luxury. Yes, of course, there are many important billions of euros of revenues derived directly derived from the beyond money, the ultra, and the very high clusters of the so-called top luxury. But if you consider, all in all, the numbers belonging to the aspirational and the top aspirational, you immediately see that the most relevant part of luxury is not its top segment, but rather the opposite. It's the lower part of the pyramid. This is also why, in terms of retail design, for instance, many companies, consider for instance Tiffany, have already been designing over the last years different areas that allow themselves to be recognizable as a brand. So not different kind of style or mood, if you wish, but different areas where they can offer different services according to this very, very different segment of customers. The forecast, to get back to the forecast, we're of course considering an overall increase of up to 480 million of consumers. So a plus 4% for the top luxury, but more importantly, 76% of increase for the lower part, so for the premium part of luxury. Of course, it's still important to consider that luxury was one of the few areas of interest, one of the few markets increasing. Of course, after the pandemic, we have to say that this forecast were not 100% true, or were not fully fulfilled, but this is something that we might have expected, also because they had to change a little bit the families and the clusters. Why? Because what happened during the pandemic was that there was a bigger gap between the top segment and the lower segment. This is also why they decided to update the threshold. So you see that now the top, the highest part of the figure is more than 50,000 euros per year. And then we have, of course, 20,000, then we have 10,000, then we have 5,000. Therefore, the threshold to define premium design has today become 5,000 and no longer 2,000 euros as average spend per year. We still have, of course, the threshold 2,000, but as you see, this is what makes the difference between the top aspirational and the aspirational, while previously it could simply define the overall market of affordable luxury. So we have now 4 clusters of top luxury and the average 2 clusters of affordable, or if you wish, premium luxury available. The numbers have not changed that much in terms of meaning, so that still the millions of consumers mainly belong to what? Mainly belong to the top aspirational and the aspirational. So even though there was a huge crisis during the pandemic due to COVID, still the hard part, the main part of the luxury market remains the affordable one. It's also true what? It's also true that many companies could gain a bit, strangely but true, could gain a bit from the pandemic, because especially referring to the companies just dealing with the beyond money cluster, they were absolutely not impacted by COVID. They were not impacted by the pandemic, which might seem strange, but it's absolutely, let's say, visible in the figures here. And the same would be for the top absolute. So we are basically referring to customers with an average yearly spend of more than 20,000 euros in luxury goods. And the figure says that they were not impacted by COVID. But even in the top luxury segment, below, of course, the threshold of 20,000, the impact was absolutely relevant, because as you can see, the gain that these brands had within their very, very highest clusters was not enough, of course, to cover and fill the gap created by the loss of the lower two segments that are the absolute and the entry absolutes, that of course lost the 30% of the revenues and the 34% of the revenues. If you of course consider not just the number of consumers, but you consider of course the revenues, it's absolutely undeniable that considering also the impact of the top aspirational and the aspirational part, many of the luxury companies, just like any company, were hardly hit by the pandemic crisis. This is due to one fact. This is due to the fact that the good majority of these companies do not just sell their product only to the highest part of these clusters, but generally try to, of course, sell the products throughout the different clusters. And this is why there were really, really very few companies who could perform as they expected during the pandemics. This also leads us to the general figures. The general figures tell us that they had, of course, to decrease their expectations in terms of growth for the luxury market. You previously remember that I showed you a figure saying that the number of consumers will be 480 million by 2022, so as of last year, while they now re-updated their forecast to a more likely 465 million of possible consumers by 2025. Of course, this is just to say that this gap between these two families of luxury is always to be considered, but the relevance of the premium area cannot be, of course, denied and must be, of course, must be thoroughly analyzed and researched, also because the company can lose money if they just focus on the top part of their consumers. This is just to say that the total luxury consumers had also increased during the pandemic. As far as the attitude and the mood of the consumers are regarded, Alta Gamma decided, and the consultants that work for Alta Gamma decided to focus mainly on the first part for one specific reason, not because they don't consider the premium sector relevant, but rather because they do know that the first part can be analyzed in terms of behavioral segmentation. This means that they can actually discover the habits, the preferences, and the attitudes of these consumers, while they do believe that the other aspirational part is generally created and is generally made of occasional consumers. Therefore, it would actually be quite impossible and very difficult to grasp their behavioral attitudes, preferences, and mood when purchasing luxury goods. But still, of course, this is just to say that they can also analyze the premium sector by, for instance, focusing on the top aspirational, so that part of the market, part of the consumers that generally spend more than 2,000 euros. Of course, this might be discussed. So as I told you since the very beginning, there might be different possible definitions of luxury of these clusters and of the consumers. We are using this, and we try to use this. Why? Because this is, of course, the point of view of the most relevant luxury institution, that is Alta Gamma in Italy. And of course, since we are based in Italy and we have contacts with Italian companies, this is, let's say, the approach that we tend to use. But how is the pricing pyramid changing as of 2022? So after the crisis, now, how is it changing? How is it now after the pandemic? Because this is also highly debated, not just, of course, the threshold. So far, I just discussed the threshold. I already introduced a little bit of the gap that was created within the world of luxury, with the top sector growing and the lower part of luxury decreasing, because of course, even the representation of this pricing pyramid could change. And this is also something that Alta Gamma tried to study. So they delivered also these interesting schemes, which says that the pricing pyramid, which has always been used throughout the very last decades, has always, let's say, generally considered the absolute part and the aspirational and the accessible. But already, of course, between the end of the 19th and the first decade of the age 2000, there already was this change in the structure. So you see the arrows that shows the influx from below. This means that the accessible and the aspirational were booming. They were becoming more and more important. Then during the period that they define as the globalization, which is the end of the first decade of the age 2000, the aspirational grew much more, of course, than the accessible, but with the absolute remaining quite strong and increasing in its lowermost part. Then, of course, there was the period of the polarization. And during the COVID, I would say that probably we had something a little bit similar to this, just lasting specifically for the periods of the lockdowns. And polarization means, of course, that the absolute area of luxury tends to grow just like the accessible, and what's in the middle tends to, of course, decrease. Then they saw in a period in which the lines were blurring, so between 2016 and 2019, where these three families of absolute, aspirational, and accessible were actually repositioning themselves at times crossing. Crossing means that at the beginning, a consumer of absolute luxury would never consider, for instance, to purchase lower budget items. It was no longer so in this period that they call the period of the blurring the lines. And today they see this new possible geometric shape to represent the pricing pyramid, that is the circle that is a cross boundaries circle. And this is, I would say, actually already a sort of a forecast, even though they wrote it and they defined it in as of 2022, so last year. Still, this is an interpretation, but this is an interpretation that also tells us how complex this world of luxury is becoming every day. Let's now get back to the consumer studies, because they also, as I already told you, analyzed the attitudes and the different kind of consumers. And the different kind of consumers, as I already introduced them to you, were 12. Their main, of course, consumers were 12, according to this research. I will just analyze quite quickly the first 4 of this study, just to provide you with an overview and a general idea of this survey, so how they were delivered, what they were analyzing. And I would start, of course, from one of the most relevant cluster of these personas, which is who is the absolute luxurer. The absolute luxurer that they define as mainly a women consumer, driven by the motto "luxury is my commodity." Here you see this woman, very elegant woman, on the very moment in which she is going to take a private jet. And luxury is my commodity is also the main payoff for a consumer that is mainly a Western consumer. So you see that this is the main market here are Italy, UK, but also I would say US, Germany, Brazil is also important. While you see that this is a consumer that is not very present, for instance, in China, Russia, Korea. This is why I said that this is basically a Western consumer. In terms of overall revenues, is quite important because the total spend is of 73 billions of euros, and the average spend per head is also important and relevant because the average spend is about 31,000 euros. But it's also interesting to see what kind of products and what kind of attitudes this consumer has. So you see that the other keywords are lifestyle, exclusivity, art, riding, Ivy, that of course refers to the Ivy League, the most famous US universities, then discerning, high society, and you already see a little bit of the products that are the most important product for this consumer. What about the personality and the lifestyle of the absolute luxury? The absolute luxury can be defined as classy and elegant, always wanting to look his or her best. I said her best because this is a consumer that is made by 55% of women. Nothing is too expensive for her, and generally lives in medium or big cities. This also tells you a lot because, for instance, whenever targeting this consumer, it's quite relevant to know where you should create your events, what kind of communication you should study for this consumer. This is a consumer that is very active, that loves golf, horse riding, and sailing. So again, how do these studies and research help us in delivering meaningful and customer-oriented, customer-based design? For instance, by telling us a lot about their habits, a lot about their taste, so that we know, for instance, when we can engage and where we can engage these consumers. The luxury attitude is that luxury to her is about exclusivity and customization. You know that in particular, the theme of customization has been one of the, of course, crucial issue to consider in luxury over the last at least 10 years. Tends to be a connoisseur, doesn't like to experiment. This means that a startup would probably have difficulties in targeting this consumer. Purchase and should probably target a different kind of persona. Purchases luxury to reward him or herself, and the product preferences are generally jewelry, clothing, vacations, unique products, targets generally known brands, as I was telling you, and especially limited editions and capsule collections. In brief, of course, this data that were of course obtained through these surveys, these direct surveys, are crucial to help us design the best possible customer journey and the best possible experience to be designed for this consumer. A very different, of course, consumer is the mega citier. The name already tells you that this is a consumer that tends to live in very, very big cities. Let me tell you that in Europe, cities tend to be medium-sized or big-sized, not mega. This, of course, already clarifies that the mega citier is mainly a consumer that lives, for instance, in China and Brazil, where the cities tend to be very, very, very big cities. And it's not a consumer particularly relevant, for instance, for the European market, but also for the American market. The size is still very, very relevant because the spend per head is 18,000 euros of average spend, of course, and the total spend is also particularly relevant because we are here analyzing 52 billion euros. This, by the way, are the figures that they analyzed before the pandemic. So today they should probably be a little bit updated, but the relevance of the figure is still the same. The keywords are traveling, innovation, urban, international, trendy, digital, cool, opinionated, newness, active, and you see also a bit of the products interesting to them. The personality and lifestyle of this consumer is that these mega cities tend to be part of a global elite and have an international imprint. And this is why the motto is "World is my city," because they do travel a lot, and they also tend to be younger, for instance, than the absolute luxury. You see that this consumer, mainly woman consumer, is in its young age, so between 25 to 35 years. Is extroverted and independent, is very active and loves traveling, and tend to live in mega cities, I've already highlighted, and has a luxury attitude that leads her to think that luxury is about quality and, again, customization, but she's also interested in the latest trends. And this is the biggest probably difference with the cluster that we analyzed as first, the one of the absolute luxury, because if you are a startup, or if you have created a cooperation with new brand, probably this would be a better target, a better possible consumer for your product and for your brand than the absolute luxury. This, of course, consumer is well informed and opinionated. Then, as far as the product preferences are regarded, they generally target few brands at a time and mainly focus on leather goods, clothing, and jewelry. But also, they shop a lot when abroad. As you can imagine, this was probably one of the clusters that was most hardly impacted by the pandemic, mainly because none of us was traveling during the pandemic. So this is also to consider. The pandemic had many different impacts. It did not just impact the stores, but it also, of course, impacted the habits in buying. The experienza is, on the other hand, mainly made by men consumers, and luxury is real only when shared. This is why you see here the image of a man with his family during some vacations. Some vacations that are, of course, one, as you can imagine, of the main products or services targeted by this consumer. This is a consumer which is quite international. It's mainly a little bit more Western, but we also have strong figures and important numbers in Japan as well. And it's generally a mature consumer in his either 40 or 50 years. And as I told you, of course, is mainly made by men. But still, of course, remember that here in this first cluster, so the total spend is very relevant. So in this case, it's about 37 billion euros per year. The personality and lifestyle is social and ongoing, enjoys sharing moments, lives in medium to big cities, and loves traveling. The luxury attitude is that to him, luxury is a unique experience and prefers a discreet style and doesn't want to be noticed. Is very sophisticated and values a superior customer care. And the product are experiences, vacations, hotels, foods, and wine, and preferred sober versus glitzy products. So a totally different kind of consumer between the first two that we saw. But let's just see the last one that I'm showing you. Of course, we're not analyzing today all of the 12 available clusters, but just let's say the most important. And indeed, one of the most important, and I would say also one of the most stable in terms of importance over the very, very last years, is the so-called fashionista. In fashion, I trust, because of course the fashionista is very, very focused on fashion. Fashion is not just something that is cool, but fashion is also a passion for the fashionista. So always try to target limited edition, loves blogging, has a passion for creativity also, knows what a capsule collection is and the relevance of this. But as far as, of course, the age and the gender, this is mainly a consumer made by women, and it's generally grown up. And this is a very, very interesting cluster, because probably this is the most international cluster of all of the 12 that they analyzed. In fact, you see that it's quite strong in Italy, but in Europe in general, because you have 12, of course, million in Italy, in England, 13 in the US. Then it's also quite relevant in China, in Russia. So this is why this is a very, very interesting international possible cluster of consumer. And she goes crazy on Shopee and buys on impulse. So this is something that needs to be, of course, analyzed thoroughly. So in order to create, again, the necessary consistent communication for this kind of consumer, is very emotional. Life is a roller coaster. Lives in medium to big cities and loves art and design. The luxury attitude is that to him or to her, luxury is about being cool and sexy and exclusive, and she's generally very opinionated on fashion and luxury. And more importantly, she is a trendsetter. There are, out of these 12 clusters of consumers, some clusters that are not made by trendsetter and that might not be even to some extent strategic to target, while it might always be strategic, for instance, to target a fashionista. Why? Because this is an international consumer, as I've already told you, because this is generally a trendsetter consumer, and you know how word of mouth could be important for the luxury sector. And also, and not of course to be underestimated, this is a consumer that targets a mix of well-known brands and new and emerging designers. So in comparison to other clusters, this is a little bit more open, of an open kind of consumer that might, for instance, buy and purchase also product manufactured by, why not, some startup. So if you are a startup, it could be a little bit more effective to target the fashionista rather than the absolute luxury, so to say, for a series of course good reasons. But as far as the products are regarded, generally this kind of consumers tends to purchase mainly handbags, shoes, clothing, perfumes, and cosmetics. So far, let's say the first four clusters of consumers, the first four personas. But today, of course, they updated this research, because every year they try to see who's growing and who's decreasing. So you see that in 2019, they said that the little prince was growing, the status seeker also, and the fashionista stayed strong. While on the other hand, the Luxembourg, the experiencer, the social wearer were decreasing. And they provided, of course, the companies belonging to Antagamma a series of some suggestions in order to update the latest changes that were happening. As of 2023, what they now say is that these luxury personas are changing, and are changing significantly after the crisis of the pandemic, mainly due to four issues to consider. Of course, they clarify that these are not exhaustive, but they would like, of course, and they underlined the rise of the new generations, together with, of course, the rise of new values that are changing societies, mainly, of course, in the Western world, but also the products and the cultures. So this is why you see that what they were trying to tell us is that new personas are probably rising today in this very year. So this is also why they discontinued the specific study with figures, with numbers dedicated to persona, and they just now try to provide the companies with a little bit more general and of course less scientific data, but so to have an overall understanding of where the market is going. This is always quite important, because the investment must be, of course, must be planned with a lot of attention. And as far as, of course, the investment are regarded, I would say that many of the luxury brands have, over the last years, invested a lot on online retail, and also, and particularly during the pandemic. You know that during the pandemic, a lot of companies, even those who did not believe so much in online retailing, tried to push the side of their revenues, simply because it was not possible to, due to the lockdowns that were, or that were, of course, imposed throughout the nation around the world, it was not possible to enter any store. Therefore, many companies decide to push their online retail, and this is also something that I would like now to briefly analyze. But before I analyze this, I would like to ask you if any of you probably know what was the actual weight of online retail in the luxury market before the pandemic. This is quite important. This is a question that I always ask my students at Poli.design. Because I have seen over the years that the students tend to overestimate the actual weight of online retail. It's undeniable, of course, that online retail is changing a lot, is indeed, let's say, a game changer in the field of retail, and is indeed relevant also for the luxury sector. But if we consider the luxury sector, we have, of course, to admit that it has its own specificities, and these specificities probably are slightly different, as we could imagine, from the mass market, also, and included the attitude of the consumers to online retail. Therefore, I'm now, of course, providing you with the answer to this question. We have to I have to remind you that before the pandemic, the actual percentage of the online goods, the luxury goods sold online was just the 12%. So the actual weight of online retail before the pandemic was the 12%. When I asked this question to the students, something like more than the half of them tend to say starts with a 60%, somebody says 70%, somebody who is, let's say, a little bit more probably skeptical says 30%, 20%, but nobody actually ever told me 12%, which was the actual figure, of course, in 2019. But if I had to ask you what was the actual weight of online retail in the luxury market after the pandemic, so what is now the actual weight of online retail, probably you would still be, let's say, tempted to say 60%, 70%, because one thing that we all do know is that during the pandemics, the percentage of online retail increased a lot, was pushed by any means by all companies in order to, let's say, fill the gap that was being created by the stores closed. Still, the figures are not those that we might expect. Even, of course, as of 2020, where, of course, the impact of the lockdowns was probably greater than in the following year, so like 2021. Still, even in this year of very, very hard and tough impact of the lockdowns, the percentage of online retail was no more than the 23%. Okay, this is quite crucial and very important to remember, even for designers, because designers today can go on designing, for instance, stores, designing displays, focusing on visual merchandising, because this is not wasted money. This is still the biggest part of the revenues of any luxury and premium brand. And this is important to be remembered and also to be, of course, conveyed to the largest majority of professionals that work within the sector. It's also visible, as you can see here in these figures, that today, as of 2022, so the latest set of data that are available to us, the percentage of online retailing is actually decreasing. This is something that we would never believe, but this is happening. This, of course, does not mean that the overall revenues from online retail are decreasing. It's just that as of today, as of 2023, the offline retail, luxury offline retail, is growing faster than online retail. This is, of course, probably something that we might have expected, because just because of the pandemic, the people really didn't want to buy or to just have their, let's say, relationship, contacts, meetings, and so on, only online. There was, of course, a physical need for physical meeting, for physical activities. We were, of course, absolutely super glad when we could finally restart live lectures here in Italy, in our classes at Poli.design, and finally meet in person the students after 2 years of lectures online. Of course, this does not mean that we are not aware and prepared for the online lectures like we are doing today, because this is absolutely a super powerful tool. But the same would be for retail. The fact that this tool is still growing, because of course the sales, the online sales in the field of luxury are growing. This is not growing today so fast as, of course, the offline retail, and this is again to be considered. Of course, it would be probably misleading if I just said that online is 21%. I will now also briefly show you and tell you why the impact of all in all the digital activities is very relevant. Simply because it does not only impact the online retail, but because it has, of course, a relevant impact also on the offline part of the revenues. But this figure is also important for us for a second reason, because it tells us that in between the different sectors, the sector of luxury, not just top luxury, but also premium design, was the sector that could recover from the, of course, incredible stroke of the pandemic just in 1 year, because as of 2021 the gap had already been filled, and now it's growing faster than before. Of course, we don't expect that it will grow this fast over the next years, but the forecast still says that it will grow. As I told you, there's been a latest update, and many of course, the consultants are quite positive in terms of percentage, because they think that as of 2022, China hadn't already reopened, at least not as we had. And therefore, this is why they said that this could give a real push also in the very next years. But of course, the forecast, as I told you, at times might be misleading, but the forecast have always said that online retail has some, of course, weight, which is to be considered. Of course, the pandemic pushed it much farther so that it could grow very, very quickly. But another, of course, interesting thing to consider is that if it hadn't been for the COVID crisis, that level that online retail has today would have probably been reached a little bit later. So COVID just froze the situation and impacted the revenues significantly. But then after that, we are more or less, if you see these figures, getting back to the figures that we could expect from the beginning. So what was the impact, all in all? The impact was basically, as I told you, in terms of revenues. And as far as the online retail is regarded, the growth in terms of percentage was mainly due to the fact that online retail was not impacted at all. So people could still go on, buy and purchase online. This is why it didn't have a real impact. But the figures, so the absolute numbers, were not incredibly different from what the consultants were expecting. What about the channels? The channels were impacted in many different ways, and this is very important for a designer, because many designers were, for instance, designing or working for corner shops at the airports. And as you can see here, the most, probably one of the most impacted area was indeed travel retail. So retail means no duty frees, no shops inside airports. Airports were simply closed, but also train stations. And this used to be a very relevant channel for luxury. But even department stores, of course, the online, as you can see here, outperformed, as I already told you, but also monobrand stores were impacted, and outlets were probably impacted a little less than the other channels. In 2022, figures changed so that all of these channels increased, all of these channels, of course, grew, but we have to say that travel retail is still not performing as expected. So it's probably one of the channels that didn't fully recover after the pandemic, while all the others, the monobrand, the outlet, the specialty, more or less mainly filled the gap and could, of course, get back to what they were doing before, of course, the pandemic. As far as the real winner of the situation, there is an interesting figure, is always, of course, provided by Alta Gamma. This time, the source is Euromonitor, that says that already as of 2018, they knew that online retail wouldn't just benefit online retailers. But if you see the figure here, you immediately understand that the real company that would benefit from this would be Amazon. If you see the online retailer, they were of course expected to grow, but just a little in comparison to the incredibly big growth that everybody was expecting by this specific subject, that is to say, Amazon. Unfortunately, this is a figure that they didn't update lately, but it will be interesting to see. So to say that this is also why online retail might have some limits, because when the player becomes just one, it could probably be very difficult for this sector to grow in a, let's say, balanced way, you might say. But let's go quickly through this, because I just wanted to, of course, get to the latest numbers, and to show you that of course, there have been winners and losers. Mainly, it is said that, for instance, spirits, wines could do a little bit better than other sectors. If you see of course, the latest figures that they released at the end of the last year, 2022, mainly all the sectors restarted. So this is why, as I said at the beginning, the field of luxury, but also the premium sector of luxury could recover fully from the pandemic, and it's still growing and increasing, with, of course, sectors performing a little bit better than others. And I would just end here with a figure that explains why the digital is important, not just in terms of absolute numbers, because in terms of absolute numbers, as I have already said, online retail is less impactful than offline retail, but because of the so-called digitally driven in-store revenues that are becoming more and more important. That is to say, today, all the brands do know that even though what they sell through their offline stores is more important than what they sell through their online stores, still a very good part, big part of what they sell, even in physical stores, is due to their communication activities, but not only communication, also their promotional activities, the services that they provide the customers with through the internet. This is why what I showed you was not, of course, considered as a possible critique to the digitization in the field of luxury, but rather should be taken as a suggestion for a balanced management of the digital, of course, tools that today not just designers, but also managers have available. For instance, to push and support offline retail. And this is why the so-called omni-channel strategy is today very important, even though it's also acknowledged that few companies are really managing this as expected. I think that it's quite late now, so I would like to stop, because I see that there are also some possible questions, and I would like to now leave the floor to you to see if you have questions, doubts, or anything that you wanted to ask or discuss.
Thank you, Lorenzo, for your time. I don't know if some of the students that joined us this morning have any questions. feel free to put the questions on the chat and we are going to read it for Lorenzo. In the meantime, Sophia, I don't know if you want to add something else about Poli.design or the benefits.
Sure, of course. So actually, I would like to remind you, you received an email about this, but that we reserved a 15% discount off the tuition fee for the cost of the master in premium design management. So in case you wish to enroll to the master or actually to start the application procedure, it takes a few weeks because it needs a selection needs to be done. There will be an interview. You will have to submit some documents like your CV, your portfolio, and also an interview testing your commitment, your motivation, and your English level. And as I said, we will be entitled to a 15% discount off the price of the master. So just feel free to reach out to us also if you have any questions, if you need any further information. You have all the email addresses on our website. Not sure then if you'd have any questions.
I think we don't have any questions yet. Nobody has right on the chat. So maybe we can end this session. Okay,
There
we
is
have
one question,
already
yeah.
one question. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in Italian actually. So
Yeah.
the 5 most, sorry, Claudia, do you want to read it for me?
No.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Sophia.
Okay, sure. So Professor Morganti, Diane is asking, what are the 5 most important points in visual merchandising?
Well, I wouldn't say that there are 5 most important points. So I'm sorry to, let's say, wrong foot the expectation of who asked me this question, but I wouldn't say that there are just, let's say, 5 most important points in visual merchandising. Generally, when we do analyze retail ergonomics, the first thing that we try to highlight is that manuals are absolutely useful, but they should just be taken as a starting point and never as a finishing point. So it's not our objective. Of course, you do start from ergonomics. So I would honestly, I don't know what you're referring to, but I would honestly start from ergonomics, which tells us about the heights, the positioning of the products. So there are honestly positions that are a little bit more effective than others. This does not mean that you cannot put, for instance, an object simply lying barren on the ground. Okay, so just to, let's say something probably even outrageous from the point of view of visual merchandising. And this is why manuals are very useful. They tell you a lot about the size, about the measurements, about the position of an item. They tells you a lot about the right level of illumination that is needed. That tells you a lot about the use of color that can help the visibility of a product. For instance, it's always said that glasses should never be exhibited on, for instance, very, very dark backdrops. But I do know a store in Milano, a very successful store in Milano, that used the black shelves to show shades, which is also something that you would never do if you just went through those 5 points of most important points of visual design. And it is to say that I think that the designer in that case just felt that pushing and boosting the mood of that store was probably more important than, of course, increasing the visibility of the item. I don't know if I agree, let's say, with the decrease of visibility of the item, because I would try to probably find a solution in the middle. But I am quite positive about that project, that project of visual merchandising, the project of retail design, specifically designed with the strong use of the black color, because all in all, it was engaging for the consumers, for the visitors. So I don't know if no, I know that I didn't, let's say, answer fully to your question, but I'm sorry if I try to see it from a very, very different point of view.
Okay, perfect, Lorenzo. So thank you so much for the answer. I don't know if some of the attendees have another question that want to write in the Q&A session.
Anyway, by the way, I also provide a bit of an answer because I said lighting, measurement, sizes, colors. So
Okay, perfect, Lorenzo. Thank you so much for your time. It was a really interesting session. For the people that join us, we are recording this session and we will put it on our YouTube channel in order if you want to see again the session, or you have some questions, so you want to repeat the slides, you can see the recording on our channel of Encuentro Creativo. So thank you so much, Lorenzo, Sofia, for all the organization and your time. And well, see you the next time. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you,
thanks to you.
Claudia. Thank
Thanks
you
a
all.
lot.
Have a good
Thank
day.
you. It has been a
Bye.
pleasure. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye.